Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I want to look at the charts of the two running for Vice President of the United States, the two candidates, which is J.D. Vance, which his name is actually James Donald Vance. I thought it was kind of interesting. His middle name was Donald, as well as Tim Walz. So I've looked at J.D. Vance's chart in great detail. It's just a lot of you don't scroll back to see previous videos that I've done. So I thought, since people are lazy and they're not going to go back and look at my previous videos, I thought I might go over his chart again and explain some things about his chart. We have his birth time. He is an interesting individual. And as a matter of fact, I just watched the movie Hillbilly Elegy, and a lot of people say the book is really good. So I actually, after seeing that movie, wonder how he's normal today from what he went through. But then we're going to look at Tim Walz's chart. We do not have his birth time, unfortunately, but I do know that his moon is in Capricorn. It's in Capricorn the whole day, so we will take a good look at his chart through the moon being the ascendant. So first, let's start with JD, since we have his birth time. Let me move over here so we can get a look and see what his chart is saying about him. And looking at his chart, he has a Leo rising. So Leo is the leader. And interestingly enough, Donald Trump has a Leo rising as well. So they are empowered and leaders. But the ruler of his chart being the sun rules Leo. It's in his 12th house. And the 12th house is difficult. So as we know, his childhood and growing up were difficult. Although he did say he had some, good times as a kid playing in, the hills of Kentucky and all of that area in Ohio. But overall, when you grow up with addiction in the family, it is really tough, especially as a child when you have no father and your mother is not there for you. Anyway, looking at his chart, the sun goes to the 12th house, which represents that he is a very private person. I don't know how private you can be when you're running for vice president or you have a book and a movie, but still, it's probably part of his healing. Now, his moon sits in Virgo, which people with the moon in Virgo are incredibly bright, very smart, very detailed and organized. And the moon in the second house will reflect his speaking ability and demeanor, that he has emotion when he talks. But most importantly is his Saturn-Mars. Now they sit in the third house, which deals with his ability to communicate and going to school. He struggled to get through school. He didn't have the means to go to school, but he worked hard. That Saturn-Mars conjunction is always about determination. When people have these two planets together, they never give up. That's the quality of Saturn combined with Mars. It's actually a powerhouse. And being in Libra, Libra is the sign of balance. It's the sign of politics. Its symbol is the scales. So his Saturn-Mars, he will fight to get ahead politically and for balance. Now, looking at this Saturn-Mars, when I think about early childhood experiences, I always look to the second house. The second house reveals your early childhood. Now, looking at his ascendant, the moon sits there, which means there was always fluctuation and change going on in early childhood. But remember, I always say you have to look at a chart from the moon. We call this Chandra Lagna. Chandra means the moon, Lagna means ascendant. So that Mars, Saturn, and Pluto all together in the second house from the moon represent the terrible dysfunction of his family and the fighting, the anger, the disruption that went on in his early childhood. That's probably, combining not only Mars and Saturn with Pluto, is probably one of the worst scenarios you can have for difficulty as a child. So moving on, if we look from his ascendant Leo, Ketu sits there with Uranus. And that's another indication of the torment and disruption and chaos that went on in his home. Ketu is losses, and Ketu in the fourth house represents the mother, but in combination with Uranus represents the unpredictability and craziness that went on in his household. Like I said, I don't know how the guy's normal. Yeah, but sometimes you can see where people's great difficulties creates and makes them great strength, gives them great strength. Through the difficulties, it's like when they're able to overcome such difficulties, they become incredibly strong. How many presidents have we known, like Abraham Lincoln, that was dirt poor and never went to school and taught himself? We have some amazing people that were able to really succeed with no opportunities out there, but they still succeeded because of the willpower that they have. And that Saturn-Mars represents willpower of never giving up. But it does definitely mean there's great difficulty, that they're knocked down many times, but it always means they get back up. And when you get back up and you never give up, one of those times you will succeed. So Jupiter is in the fifth house. And Jupiter in the fifth house is intelligence. And it's creativity. It's actually the house of entrepreneurs because they're able to create businesses. But Jupiter there in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the sign of the truth seeker, and it deals with the law, finding the law. So Jupiter in the fifth, he really wants justice and truth. And that's what I see with Jupiter in the fifth house. He's highly intelligent. But the Sun and Venus in the 12th are very difficult. Yes, that's one thing that he's had to overcome, great obstacles in his life. But let's just pop up to the 10th house, which is the house of work and career and your social standing, opportunities, your purpose in life is the 10th house. And he has Rahu there in Taurus. And Rahu sits very close to the midheaven. The midheaven is the highest point in the chart, represents your career. And Rahu there means he is an achiever. He really seeks to find that purpose. So just moving forward with the elections, we know that Jupiter is transiting in Taurus. And what's so interesting is Jupiter has already crossed over his Rahu, and when it did, he was chosen as the vice president. Isn't that interesting? I always say that when Jupiter crosses over Rahu, it gives. Usually with the price, means you got to work hard and something's difficult about it, but it gives. And Jupiter on his Rahu and Jupiter in his 10th house means he will succeed. Furthermore, notice his moon at 25 degrees of Virgo. On November 5th, transiting Jupiter will be 24-25 degrees of Capricorn, meaning it is in an exact trine to his natal moon in the second house of gains, of financial wealth, of the voice. But let me just say this, when Jupiter aspects the moon, there is happiness. So I have to say, Jupiter aspecting the moon on election day, November 5th, so precisely, pretty much means he's going to win the vice president position of the United States. I'm pretty confident of this. And I say that because let's go over to Tim Walz's chart now. And looking at Tim Walz's chart, we know his moon is in Capricorn. And Capricorn is the achiever. Capricorn is somebody who wants to step up with their career. It's the mountain goat. It climbs the mountain, right? So, but Saturn is in his second house. Tim Walz didn't have an easy childhood either. Saturn in the second, things were difficult. I didn't hear much about his childhood, but I know Saturn being there, it wasn't easy. I know this. Now, Mars and Sun in the third house will make him very ambitious and driven. I mean, he's the governor. And, you know, it's not easy to rise to those positions. So he's done really well, and his drive and ambition have given him great rewards. So looking though at where his Jupiter Mercury are, they go to the fourth house, which is really nice. It means you live in a large house, you have good real estate, you travel the world, Jupiter Mercury together. But in the fourth house, that's actually called the seat of power. So this is a good thing for political rise and ambition and what he's destined for. But when I think about where Jupiter is transiting at the time of the elections, it's in Taurus and it's in his fifth house from the moon. Not a bad placement, actually. That's quite good. And Venus, but Jupiter's already crossed over Venus. This was probably around the time that he was chosen when Jupiter aspected his Venus. And what's pretty interesting is that JD's Rahu, which sits at 10 degrees of Taurus, sits right on Tim Walz's Venus. And Rahu is tough. Rahu is extremes. And, you know, Tim with his Venus being in Taurus, it's kind of nice. But I'm telling you, JD's going to chew him up with Rahu on his little sweet Venus. So, yeah, that debate didn't go well for him. And that's because of the synastry, really, of their charts, too. Yeah. So that's very, very interesting. But it's interesting that transiting Jupiter crossing over first JD's Rahu, he got chosen, and Jupiter crossing over Tim's Venus, he got chosen. Jupiter gives. So Venus from the moon rules the 10th house. And Jupiter being there is excellent. The only issue is this. It's already crossed over that degree. It's not close in degree to his Venus. But, you know, he's you know, a world figure now because of that. But here's the issue that I find that's a problem for Tim. His Mars sits at 13 degrees of Pisces, which is great for his ambition and drive in the third house. But the eclipse just crossed it. And what I'm looking at is K2. I'm sorry, it's Rahu just crossed over his Mars. But the solar eclipse at 15 degrees of Virgo was affecting his Mars. And that's that represents big shifts of energy and change. I personally haven't felt good things happen in my own life when eclipses crossed over my planets. I felt like, you know, they say eclipses aren't bad or good. They just represent radical changes. But they've never been nice events in my life personally. So I'm thinking, you know, with that eclipse opposing, the eclipse happened at 15 degrees of Virgo. And therefore his Mars is being affected, which I feel like kind of hurts him. And, you know, right around the eclipse, actually, yeah, come to think of it, was the debate. And he didn't fare as well as JD did in the debate, let's face it. So that eclipse caused upsets in his life. And with his sun being in Pisces, well, Rahu's already crossed over it, but that's extreme. Rahu can give, but with a price. So he's in this position. He's seen all over the world. Is it worth it? That's a good question. I bet it is, because it's probably going to do wonders for the future of his career. I mean, to run for Vice President of the United States is quite an honor, you know, so that's what I'll say. But another thing I noticed, one more thing in this chart, notice where his Rahu and Ketu are. Rahu sits there in Gemini and Ketu in Sagittarius, but notice their degree markings, 12 degrees. So what happened with Rahu and Ketu, where they are in the sky during the elections, or yes, election day, Rahu and Ketu are 12 degrees of, Rahu's 12 degrees Pisces, Ketu's 12 degrees of Virgo, and it creates a grand cross with his nodal axes at 12 degrees of Gemini and 12 degrees of Sagittarius. That is stressful. And just going back to JD's chart, I think that Jupiter, the exact trine to his natal moon, and by the way, his natal moon sits exactly on Donald Trump's natal Jupiter. And for the United States chart, Saturn sits there too. So here's what I'm trying to say. Whenever a president or people running the country, they have planets that align with the United States chart, that means that they will be president. Now, I'm not saying JD will be president, but he could. We definitely could, because his moon is exactly on Saturn from the United States chart. Remember, I keep talking about the chart from 1776, July 4th. Saturn was at 24 degrees of Virgo, and JD's moon sits at 25 degrees of Virgo, and Donald Trump's Jupiter sits at 24 degrees of Virgo. All of them tying this in and together with the country of the United States. And when I go back to Tim's chart, he doesn't have a planet there. Well, he does have his sun. I will give him that. I take that back. At 23 degrees of Pisces, which is opposing the United States Saturn. But weighing it all out with Jupiter's transit during this time of the election to his moon, and his moon conjuncts Donald Trump's Jupiter, I say that together there's going to be a win, and he will become the Vice President of the United States. Now, will he become the president? We'll have to look down the road, because we've got a lot more to deal with before that happens. So we'll leave that for another video, another take on that. But yes, that's how I see both the vice presidential candidates' charts. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it didn't upset you in any way. But just be open-minded and look at where the stars really are. And eclipses are not so easy. And that's what Tim Walz is dealing with, the eclipse energy, while JD is dealing with Jupiter energy. So that's my analysis looking at both of their charts. So thank you for listening. If you would like more information about me, you can always go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. Sign up for my Patreon page as well as my newsletter. And don't forget the Galactic Planner. Thank you.